I would take the sterile needles, and I would take his serum with me and watch, and making sure that they used the sterile pad, on the top of the serum bottle, and that they used the sterile needle that I brought, because even in Australia I did that, where we would think things would be better.
Quite the experience. So Ted, apparently ministers got a better deal from when they went to see the baby doctor. Was that, do you suppose that's because the baby doctor wanted to kind of grease the skids a little bit to put in a word for the good man?
Well, Dr. Carr wouldn't need any grease.
Your thoughts, as you heard, we're just kind of going around the circle here, comments?
Well, look, number one, I grew up in a small central Texas town where my grandfather was the pharmacist. And above the drugstore, the physician was rented space. And those two men, weren't women then, practiced what I later understood would be very humane medicine. I mean, many's the night the pharmacist or the doctor is called out, they take care of people. So I grew up with a sense of the humaneness of the profession. As I grew and I got older, I began to get involved with poor people, especially at first the aged poor. And in often many communities, they were without, especially as it became unprofitable for physicians to live in small communities. They couldn't practice their humaneness. But that's when, then under Lyndon Johnson, we got Medicare and Medicaid. And that, from my perspective, with people suffering a lot, was salvific. It gave people the humaneness of medicine that they weren't getting, in my experience. Then by the 1970s, I noticed a thing that was terrible. I didn't know how to judge it for a while, but then I began to realize that I think in our society we were given a false choice. The choice between being humane and being productive. I made friends with a number of physicians, and I'd hear these awful stories about how they were coerced in many ways to be productive, and that made the humaneness a difficult thing to put into the picture. So, I think it's a false choice in our society if we put it to where we have to choose between being humane and being productive. And if that's the choice we're being faced with, it's a big challenge for us. It won't do, not for this country.
Mm-hmm. Joining us a little bit late, Representative Delwin Jones. Chris, if you want to swing the camera around and let's introduce him. I'm glad I understand you just came in from Austin. That you
I came from the airport to your house, to this house.
Right, and you're trying to get them straight down there and listen to you, and that would get things in a better direction. Now, you've had many years. My dad was telling on you. He said that you and he went to high school together. So
see, I got here before he did.
Oh, okay.
If you've seen that farmhouse out next to the Montford Prison Unit, when you turn off the White House, I was born in that house in 1924. And the county doctor came out to deliver me because the farmers didn't have any money in those days. And I'm sure the county doctor got some very, very minimum stipend from the county, being designated county doctor. And his responsibility was to respond to the farm folks when they needed medical attention. And I've got a picture of me on the front porch of that house before I was a year old, and the chickens were looking at me as I sat on this blanket. But I tell people, they say, how long have you been in Lubbock? And I say, well, I was born beside the road before they built the roads, because at that time that was part of the wet ranch. And a person who wanted to farm, if they could find a rancher who would let you put some land in cultivation, then the first year you made a crop, you didn't have to pay any rent. And my dad moved there in 1923 and cleared 200 acres of all of the various mesquite and cat claw type brush. prepared it for farming and made a real good crop in 1924, and bought a farm 2 miles from that house. So my experience with medical world started by delivery into this world by Dr. J.W. Rollo, the county doctor from Lubbock County at that time.
And then how you've heard comments, people saying it evolves. Dr. May's talking about the technology that came in during his time. Reverend Dotz talks about this choice of humaneness or productivity. All the years that you've worked with in the legislature about trying to chart a course for us.
Well, of course, we've had one of the biggest changes that I've seen occur when I first got elected. I was in shock that whatever position nurses took, the medical world, the doctors took the opposite side. They were in a clash, and I visited with some of them then, telling them, look, you're in the same business, and neither of you can function without the other. I mean, they're just, the nurses are the right-hand arm, the doctor is the professional, technically trained person, but he couldn't function if he didn't have nurses. I mean, that would be just an impossibility. But it's come a long ways, and then I authored the bill that created Texas Tech Med School. I remember at the time I worked trying to convince people in the legislature about how important it would be in Lubbock and how we would be the medical center of this area. And I honestly inside was kind of feeling a little guilty. I thought I was taking a used car position of overselling. And now as I drive out and look at all of the adjunct facilities and everything else that has come to Lubbock because of the med school, it's just unbelievable how we have become the medical center, not just for the South Plains area, but for all of West Texas and for New Mexico and parts of Oklahoma. And I recall that when I passed that bill, I put in the provision that we'd have a facility in Amarillo, Midland, Odessa, and El Paso. I didn't realize how prophetic I was being, that if we made it Lubbock only, we could not sustain it, that we needed all of West Texas supporting us to maintain it. The Chamber of Commerce came unglued when I did that, telling me this is our project, we don't intend to share it with all the rest of the world, and yet our med school has become the main factor that has pulled all of West Texas together, because medical issues are the issues of today. The costs are astronomical, there's no doubt about it. These proposed health plans, from what I've seen of them, most people worry and talk about, as you probably have done here, talk about the medical aspect. But let me tell you, there's a financial aspect to it. Nobody's seen all the details, but everybody's trying to interpret it. And it appears to some of us, and I think we're right, that there's a big effort to shift a lot of these pie-in-the-sky gift medicine things that are promised to the public. They're going to shift that over to state responsibility. And when you do that, then you're suddenly going to have a hue and cry of public education about, whoops, all of the money's going into these health and human service programs, and there's not enough money to go around. So that's where the big hit's going to come. Mm-hmm. I think to us in Austin is the fact that these shifting medical costs are going to make such a heavy burden on the state that it's going to damage public education, higher education, and everybody else, because how many $1 billion can you generate even in a state that's in a good, strong position? Mm-hmm.
So Mark, do we need to build a time machine and you and I go back to a simpler day and get out of being providers in the current system?
Well, let me say this. I probably can say that I was the last in a trained realm, and looks like we got guests here. Sorry about that. That dog wasn't supposed to be out here. But where patients were admitted to the hospital the night before surgery, that was routine. That went away, and I'm 53 years old. That went away as I finished my residency. And I don't know how she got out